Recently, I saw a headline that said chronic dehydration may be a risk for premature aging. My first reaction to that was, I don't believe so. If I've heard it once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Be sure to drink water. Well, um, I've always been skeptical of that. In fact, for about 30 years, I was a weekend endurance runner. And yes, there was some risk associated with dehydration, but the real risk was actually on the other side. It was called hyponatremia. And you've seen that over the recent past with the heat wave in the United States. You've seen news about a couple of otherwise healthy young people who drank a couple of bottles of water and died from hyponatremia. Let's break it down. Hypo, too little. Na is Na. It's a prefix standing for sodium. Emia, meaning in the blood. So too little sodium in the blood. What happened was they got dehydrated. They lost sodium and electrolytes, sodium, potassium chloride in their sweat, and so when they rehydrated with water only, they had too little sodium in their blood. Their brain swells up. You get seizures and die. So, from my perspective, that was the bigger, the more acute risk. And again, this was not the past heat wave over the past month in the U.S. is not the only time that this has been seen. It's a well-known entity, especially in the endurance running community. People running in hot weather, 70, 80, 90, 100 degrees, and sweating and drinking water instead of electrolyte type of replacement fluids, getting seizures and or dying. So I'd always said, hyponatremia is a risk, but dehydration, not so sure. And so, but for some reason, I must have had some extra time or something. I looked this up and saw that it was in Lancet. And then that was interesting. Lancet, yes, it is. It's one of the top medical journals in the world. It gets a little bit of a bad rap for firing too quickly, pulling the trigger, sometimes having inadequate review of the research that it publishes, but still otherwise pretty good journal. And you start looking at this, and it actually came from Eric, the atherosclerosis risk in community trials. Very, very good study. It's a big study of 15,762 Black, African American, and white Americans, no other racial groups. And that matters for atherosclerosis and diet and risk. Academically, a good study. So then you look at it and you say, well, number one, why did they use that study? Well, it was because they were able to look at sodium. Number two, it wasn't just a cross-sectional study. It was a study that actually followed up patients for over 20 years. So maybe there is some reality here. Maybe there is a real research signal saying, chronic dehydration, at least as measured by hypernatremia, too high of sodium level, may be an issue. So maybe I got a little bit too deep into that. Let's go back, get up to about 30,000 feet, talk about the channel for a minute, and let me hand that out and do a couple of short content items before we get back into this. Let me hand it back over to you, Jesus. But before you do, let's remember to do quick introductions. I'm Ford Brewer. I am very interested in preventing the things that kill you or disable you. Heart attack, stroke, cardiovascular disease being the number one items. I didn't just come at this from a personal YouTube perspective. I used to run the program in preventive medicine at Johns Hopkins many years ago. Jeannie?
Hello, Dr. Brewer. I am Jeannie Shanholzer. I am a nurse practitioner that works in the practice. And so I see patients and I get to join the lovely YouTube channel on Wednesdays.
Sounds good. And my
Yes.
name is Jesus Vega. I'm a physician in Mexico. I'm a specialist in preventive and occupational medicine, working with Dr. Burrell for almost 2 years, a little bit more than that, especially on the content side. And I transition a little bit on scribing and documenting visits. No, I don't see patients in the US. I do have a lot of patients in Mexico, though. So if you're nearby Mexico, of course, we can talk about a visit here on the US. I do support Dr. Burrell on other aspects. And I just wanted to let you know, Dr. Brewer, so the show can be over. We just started with the conclusion. I was just trying to keep a little bit of clickbait right there. But so what's today's hidden risk factor? Oh, it's hydration. You can just move on to another page.
Here you tried to create such suspense, and I just came out and blurted the whole thing.
Well, maybe it's a good thing, because sometimes we have that criticism that, oh, your introductions are just too long. 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Just tell me what's that hidden risk factor so I can see if I have it or not, right?
Well, to me, actually, there's a bigger question, there's a bigger mystery, and that is something that we've heard as sort of an urban myth forever. Drink plenty of water. And guys like me that really focus on the data, the evidence, all saying, oh, come on. Drink plenty of water. If I've heard that once, I've heard it 1,000 times. Where's the data? Where's the beef? And to me, the real interesting point is maybe there is some beef to that. Clearly, there is some evidence. How strong is it? Anyhow, go ahead.
It's a double combo for me. I can say I was one of those guys who were like, I was taught that, of course, and probably didn't question it enough. But I can tell you, when I was in med school, I used to drink a lot of sugary beverage. Don't ask me why. I was just raised that way. And then I switched to water only, some electrolytes here and there, but water only. And I can tell you, just by doing that, I lost a lot of weight. I went back to my waist size when I was in high school after gaining like 10, 15 kilos. So probably has to do way more with stop drinking sugar, but drinking water, of course, to me, at least to me, it helped. One anecdote and one simple case, it's not enough. That's why we're presenting evidence on 15,000 people, of course. And we have a couple of short topics. There's a lot of noise about vitamins, especially vitamin A, and also with the vegan diet. There's a really good case to make about vegan diet, but I'm gonna present you an abstract from a conference that's gonna give you some perspective on one specific vegetable and how research is done in some settings. And you might see this on the headlines, on papers, on or magazines, and you can get the wrong picture from data that is probably not as strong that you might think as you might think it is. We had some previous topics. We talked about different diets, the American Heart Association perspective on that. They beat up a lot on low carb diet, but we analyzed that deeply on the last show last Wednesday. So after you see this one, go ahead and watch that other one. Really good information. We also covered colchicine, which was a hit. We were surprised that colchicine got so much attention for their cardiovascular inflammation properties. So another good show to check out. And the week before that, we had Daniel Trevor presenting his book, The Holy Trinity, for which Dr. Burr wrote a chapter for that. And he was sharing us his story about how he had a heart attack on his 40s, 50s, and then he buckled up, changed his lifestyle, did a lot of stuff, and now he has a six pack. So really interesting story with Trevor, with Daniel. He also contacts us really often and sends really interesting information, key things that we need to cover, and even helps us to keep ourselves updated on relevant information that comes every day. So a shout out to Daniel right there. If you're looking to get preventive services, becoming a patient from Dr. Brewer, getting more than just the free content that you see on YouTube. That is a lot of free content. We have had a lot of people saying to Dr. Brewer that just by watching their videos, they change their lifestyle and their lives change, and they are safe from a heart attack just by doing some slight changes. But if you need a specific recommendation for your specific case, go visit our website. We'll be happy to see you as a patient. Well, I mean, when I say we, Jeannie and Dr. Brewer, of course. Jeannie, this is and talking about patients. This one is for you.
Okay, so the beware of the insurance marketplace. This cannot be overstated enough because it is such a confusing area. It doesn't matter how much information we try to give people on the backside and how thorough we try to be, we can never give exact answers on any costs that are associated with using your insurance. It's just the way that it is. So one major concern in the clinical area, but we understand the effect that the cost will have on our patients. We know that things are expensive, and that is why we'll tell you these are what are recommended, but we do not require, meaning we recommend that you get all the tests that we order, but if you are unable to, then we understand. However, our assessment is the most thorough when we have all of the tests that we recommend. So I don't know how much more simply we can state that, because that is a question that gets asked in 17 different ways, but the answer is the same. Dr. Brewer has the ideal tests that we order. We understand they can be expensive, and we understand when people can't afford them, but our assessment is not as thorough as it could be if we have all the tests. Does that make sense, Dr. Brewer?
It does. And let me just ask you, it sounds like maybe you get beat up a little bit over that issue.
I actually do. I try to be thorough with what I explain to people from the beginning and all the way through. The problem is people are frustrated with the system, and I am not the creator of the system. I am just a bystander and someone who's trying to guide people through it. And the problem is, you have to go to the horse's mouth on these issues. If you want to know what you're going to be responsible for, after all your deductibles and your copays and your insurance and your lab and all the rest of it, you need to call the lab. You need to give the diagnosis codes. We send the lab orders and we don't have that up today, but hopefully in the next week or two, we will. We'll show you a copy of the order that we send you, and it'll have your diagnosis codes, and it'll have the specific orders for the specific labs. We try to be as thorough as we can. We even have some patients that are overseas, and we try to get those things converted. That's something that I was going to talk to Jesus about. We need to get something in place too for that, because when we're talking to the people in Europe and telling them what our specs are on labs, they don't coincide. So Jesus, gonna need your help there.
Oh, great. More job for me. Okay.
More job for you. I know. You said we didn't include you, Jesus, so we're wanting to include you.
As you do. You all
Yeah.
have those talks between you, and then I found out 2 months later I should be doing something.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
No,
so-
that's good. That's good. And
Let me
testing
ask
is
you.
a big issue outside the US.
Yes. What'd you
So-
say, Dr. Brewer?
So, Jeannie, if I'm a patient and you order some labs, can't I just say to the lab, look, only do the things that my insurance will cover?
You can say that to the lab, and the lab should be able to tell you what is allowable and what is not, and what you had in the last 78 days and what you haven't. But I'm going to tell you, it's not a perfect system, and so there's just a lot of room for error. We do the best we can, but we're trying to see patients, keep things under control, keep orders going, continue to see new patients in the practice. And sometimes we get, 8 emails about the same question. And no matter how many times we're asked, our answers are the same. We don't know. We really just don't know. We have ideal lab work. That ideal lab work isn't always recognized by your insurance. Sometimes it is. Like, for instance, we're starting to see the CIMT, which is an imaging study, is being covered in Texas under Medicare. Why? We don't know. we're glad, but we don't, and I'm sure that's probably not for everyone in Texas. So it's kind of a roll of the dice, right, Dr. Burr?
So when you say go to the horse, get it from the horse's mouth, we're not the horse.
We're not the horse.
Who is
we are
the
not
horse?
The horse's mouth. The horse's mouth is Medicare, but Medicare is going to tell you to go to the lab, which is the horse's tongue. And that's where you're going to have to go, there. We're just
lab, make sure that they know to only do the labs that your insurance will cover, unless you want to pay direct pay.
Right. And
so
with that being said, when you come back, we're going to have not the whole picture. We're going to have part of the picture as well. Cause then people are like, well, what does this mean and this mean? And we don't have 8 of the 20 tests we've ordered. That's just hypothetical, but it's hard for us to know because we don't have the whole picture.
So that makes me, as a patient, and if I'm an uninformed patient and I'm listening to this, it makes me afraid to come see you.
Well, and I don't think you have to be afraid. I think you have to be knowledgeable, and I think you have to use the resources we give you. And we try to give you the resources. We try to give you all the information. It takes work on the front side. Anything that there's some hoops. There's just hoops you have to go through. If you want to know what your insurance is going to pay for, this is what I would do. And this is what I recommend people do. Call the lab, give them your diagnosis codes, find out this. And if they can't give you an answer on the front line, then say, may I speak with the manager, and just keep going up the food chain until someone can give you the answers you need and to know specifically what you're responsible for. I know with private insurance, when you go to the lab, they generally know what you're going to be responsible for right there, and they collect your money sitting right there.
And if I can throw my 2 cents on that discussion, insurances might be different between each other, even Medicare. I have seen patients that say that the lab tells them, okay, you are on different type of private insurance. They can tell you which ones. On Medicare, I think it's really hard, even for the lab. And they just make you sign that advanced beneficiary notice, and they tell you, we don't know, we will just send you the bill for those that were not covered.
Right. Well, and what I learned the other day was I was talking to a patient, and he was really frustrated with, what would be covered and what wouldn't. And he wanted all the answers, which I was, I'm not able to give him. And then he said, well, the Medicare says it's coming out of South Carolina, and our home practice is in South Carolina. And he said, well, I'm not in South Carolina. And I said, well, there's different regions. And he said, well, there's not. And so I said, well, there is. And so I went online, and there are 10 different regions for Medicare. So, and we don't make these rules. And believe you me, we just are a victim of the rules. We're just in the middle of it.
So Gilbert, could you show that image of Jesus as the answer Nazi for a second?
What a segue.
It's not no question for you, it's no answer for you. And that comes from the soup Nazi on Seinfeld. We'll clean that image up to get it a little bit clearer. I don't know if Andy Randazzo is a member or not, but I'm going to cover his question really quick. He just asked the question, is a CIMT covered under Medicare? Well, Jeannie just clarified that. We have seen it covered in a few patients in Texas. So that's all we can say. Great question, but again, as Jeannie has said, we're not insurance guys, we're medical guys. And your relationship with your insurer is yours, not ours. We can only give you some of the things that we see. We don't adjudicate insurance, especially lab insurance. The lab has to do that, and your insurer.
Right.
Anything else on that before we go?
No, I think we're good. Just, there's some examples there of different patients and different things, and vitamin D levels, and the lab charged $500 for the test. And again, those are things we don't know. And the only way you're going to know is to talk to the lab and give them the codes. And then that'll give you, grounds to stand on if they don't follow through with what they tell you it's going to be in the beginning. But those are just kind of all those examples up there are they're just examples. And again, we do our best to give you as much information and to help you not be frustrated. But you still may be a little bit frustrated.
Well, insurance is frustrating.
It is.
And the alternative is to pay on your own. That's a lot simpler, but it costs more.
Right. Sure.
Most of the time. So Jay Petard answers, his was not covered in Vermont. Now, I don't entirely understand that, but I don't think we're going to go down this bunny hole. He says, and I live in North Carolina. He's talking about his CIMT coverage.
Yeah.
So,
And I heard from somebody who got their CIMT paid for by insurance, but I don't remember if this was Medicare or not. But in some cases, you have success stories, so it's different for every person.
And we're hopeful when we hear those success stories. We're always hopeful, and we try to help that happen. But we're on the front line trying to take care of patients and this other insurance stuff. It's frustrating for everyone, and we understand that. But it is what it is.
We're not the horse's mouth.
So here's what it is, or here's what I do. We go into all this discussion and patients will say, that's very, very helpful, I guess. But what does that mean? What do I do? I can't tell you, or I'm not going to tell. I could tell you what to do, but I'm not going to. I will tell you what I do. CIMT, I pay for it myself out of pocket. CGM, Freestyle Libre, and recently the Dexcom 7, I paid out of pocket with cash. I didn't try to get insurance to pay for it because I know they won't. And guess what? I think that the value to me in preventing me from having a heart attack or stroke is more than worth it. Why don't we go to the next topic?
Yeah, it's about time. I'm just shouting out what some people are probably thinking. I'm 36. I don't care about Medicare.
There we go.
So short topic. We have two for today. So one of the short topics for today, vitamin A and heart disease. So this was presented on the American Journal of Physiology, Heart and Circulatory Physiology, 2022. So they did some tests on mice with diabetic cardiomyopathy, which is a specific disease of people who have diabetes and don't have heart disease. So this is really odd, meaning no atherosclerosis. So this is not a specific, it's just diabetes hurting the muscle of the cell directly. They tested a vitamin A deficient high-fat diet and a vitamin A sufficient high-fat diet for 20 weeks. And they saw that there were no changes on the heart muscle structure on those mice. However, after doing some gene profiling, they found out that it looks like vitamin A has a role on protecting the mitochondrial metabolism of those muscle cells on mice. So to me, this is kind of contradictory results. Like, we have genes that say that vitamin A protects the heart, but we tested this for 20 weeks and we didn't see a difference. But again, it goes to show that vitamin supplementation, it's important in some cases, but definite answer or results are hard to get. It's sometimes going from theoretical to practical. It's just too hard. But that's just something to take a look at. Any comments on this one?
Jeannie, if none from you, I'll make a couple of comments. I just listened to a podcast last night from the Diet Doctor on mitochondria. And overall, it was a little bit frustrating simply because the topic of mitochondria remains frustrating. For example, we talk about supplements, CoQ10 and ubiquinol for mitochondria, and the lack of hard evidence about it. And it makes sense, because how are you going to do research on mitochondrial function? This another topic in this bunny hole is that he was specifically looking, the researcher that was talking was specifically looking at mitochondrial function and mental health diseases. And it was very interesting. He said, there's tons and tons of research being done, and there's no question that mitochondria are a big deal in all of these diseases. And guess what? It's all about translating energy from food and oxygen into energy that the cell can use. So any type of function, whether it's thinking, whether it's muscle activity, whether it's metabolic function, all of these require energy. So mitochondria are critical, obvious and true. The other point that he made that was very interesting is, guess what? It's pretty simple. So when you do this research on mitochondria, you basically want to find things that damage mitochondria and then do the research. Well, like insecticides and things. And guess what? It's very easy to find things that damage mitochondria. So a couple of little warnings there, but it retained that frustration of, okay, all of this is very interesting, but what do we do? Not a lot of answers there yet.
Why don't you tell us what you will do?
Well, I will say this. One thing that it did help me reconsider. Again, I've always been a skeptic about several things. One of those things that I've been skeptic about is, even though I had to study toxicology for occupational medicine. You and I both did that. I have tended to ignore a lot of the concerns about toxins, glyphosate, association with water stored in plastic bottles in heat. Now I'm rethinking, because the reason I tended to ignore them in the past was you see less documented damage associated to these, quote, toxin exposures than you do with something that's just like uber common. We know prediabetes, diabetes, insulin resistance is killing people, disabling people. What's the number we talked about? There's going to be 2,000 today die from heart attack alone.
Yeah.
Between 2,000 and 3,000 tomorrow. The next day, there were that many the day before, and that's just in the U.S. alone. So by far the most common toxin is carbohydrates when you can't metabolize them. So again, my major focus has always been dealing on the usual suspects, the things that we know are killing people, but people are ignoring.
I have a question, and you may or may not know the answer on this. So a diet that is not sufficient in vitamin A, is there a specific diet that you see that more in, a type of diet? Or because we were talking about micronutrients the other day, so I was just kind of curious on that. Do you know, Jesus?
Not really. Usually vitamins, especially vitamin A, you will see more on vegetables. So I'm guessing people who are on a carnivore diet, we know they might be deficient on omega-3s, vitamin C, probably vitamin A. But you see, vitamins are different from each other. You have different needs for each vitamin. And even each vitamin has different metabolism pathways. So I don't see as critical vitamin A as you will say about vitamin D, E, or C. So that's kind of the difference. And even I read somewhere vitamin A has been always promoted for eye health, for
eyes.
sight, for the eye.
Visual.
And, visual, yeah. And even there are some papers that are challenging that as well. So
I think you're bringing up a good point. The carnivore diet has become more and more popular, and there are some challenges in terms of micronutrients as we get more and more patients that come to us with the carnivore diet. That's one of the things we're having to gear up, and that is advising them regarding micronutrient issues.
Well, and I looked up food sources high in vitamin A and leafy greens, orange and yellow vegetables, pumpkin, winter squash, tomatoes, bell peppers, cantaloupe, mango, beef liver, fish oils, milk, and eggs. So I can see that could be the
beef liver. The beef liver, it's interesting. So if you're in a carnivore but you're eating liver, so probably you're safe from this one,
right?
And a lot of people don't like the visceral organs. But I can tell you, and you might already know this, in Mexico, it's really common to eat liver, to eat some intestines, to eat some tongue. So that's really good.
It used to be far more common in the U.S.
I imagine on the south side
Yep.
of the U.S., right?
Rural areas.
That part that used to be Mexico, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay, but I digress.
The Texans would say they actually are their own country, and they have been. Texas was its own country for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny.
So I'm gonna use Dr. Bruce Powers as the sub-Nazi over here, the question Nazi. Roseanne Hadlock, I love tongue. I love tongue as well. I also love eating tongue tacos. So
I don't like when you can see the taste buds on them.
just close your eyes. Okay.
I think when you eat them in the middle of Missouri, it's a little different than probably in Mexico. It's a lot different.
So let's go to another one. This one is from this got got into some magazine last year. They presented that this in Science News as it was from 2022. Then they corrected that because this is information actually from 2015. So that's why it got to us. And you will see that on research, you have two different pathways, or even more. But I'm going to show you two to present publish some paper. You can go through the traditional way of sending your full paper to a journal. They will scrutinize that and decide if it's worth publishing or not. And sometimes it's a really good evaluation of the paper. Sometimes it's not. But then you see a publication, there's more details on that. But you have other options. So whenever there's an international conference, they will send some kind of a promotion or something like that to tell their members, hey, there's an upcoming congress. If you have some paper you want to present, send your abstract over to us. And they will evaluate the abstract only. So those papers got presented on the conference, and if the paper is attractive enough, it's gonna go into the headlines like this one did. The thing is, this type of papers are usually not as evaluated in detail on the side of the statistical analysis. They will show just the results. So that's what I will tell you. Anything that comes from a conference, it's not. I'm not saying it's bad evidence. Just take it with a pinch of salt. And as you see here on this one, this was presented by some researchers from Nigeria, and they presented this on the Endocrine Society's annual meeting on 2015. So they tested metformin plus varying doses of onion extract, 200 to 600 milligrams per kilogram, on some mice as well. And this was on diabetic mice who were also on metformin. They were testing both metformin and onion. And they realized that complementing metformin with onion extract decreased blood sugar for up to 50%. So we don't know the exact mechanisms, and it's important to consider that onion extract can increase your appetite, and that can lead some gain weight, of course, as well. So I'm not saying that you should be eating more onion. It seems like it has some impact on blood glucose. But again, be careful for what you see on magazines, because sometimes the information can be magnified or just changed, and you might not see the real source behind it. Any thoughts?
From my perspective, yeah, a couple of things. You can understand how people would start thinking about onion extract. It's related to garlic, and garlic does have some fairly good evidence. But I think the biggest comment I'd have is exactly what you said. When you see headlines and it says it was presented at a conference, beware, because the vetting, the judging is not based on much. It's based on an abstract usually, and not really on the entire article. So it's bad enough looking at a magazine, a judged science magazine, which we do all the time, and show problems, it's far worse when you're just looking at an abstract.
Yeah, and be careful where you get your medical information. Sometimes you get even experts' opinions. I mean, not throwing anything at you, Doctor Brewer, but experts' opinion are the bottom of the chain on what
Absolutely.
evidence is. So whenever somebody says, "Well, it's my expert opinion," okay, that's good. I'm not saying it's not worth hearing to that advice, but if that expert opinion comes backed up by hard evidence like randomized control trials, meta-analysis, stuff that multiple, it's sometimes one's not enough. So that's when you say, okay, so this is coming from a good side, right?
So my expert opinion is beware of expert opinions.
That's why I
Very
don't present.
right.
That's why I don't present my opinions as expert opinions. Those are our opinions, and I'll tell you what I will do, as Dr. Brewer will say.
Yeah, but I think that's good though. I think that's what helps people understand. And I've even, Dr. Burr, I've heard you say that before, what I would do. And I mean, and that brings it back down to, I've read all the stuff, but this is what I would do based on what I've, taken in and what I've read. So.
Yeah, and it's hard to go into judo and expect somebody to tell you what to do. I mean, there are people who do that, and I'll be careful.
And both of you have heard me say it many times. Here's what I would do, but you also know I don't preface that by saying I'm an expert.
Yeah,
the patient did come to see me for a reason. They valued, they're willing to pay for that opinion. But anyhow.
Yeah, and it's a backed up by evidence opinion. So that's the difference, of course.
So here, Jesus created a little bit of mystery, and I blew it. What's this hidden risk factor for premature aging?
You have to go to the start of the video to find out. Go backwards, and on the first 10 seconds, Dr. Brewer will tell you.
Oh, that's so funny.
Okay, so let's move on to this hidden risk factor. We're going to talk about hydration and sodium. So I'm going to give it to you, Dr. Brewer. It's a good thing that you said what you said, because we're 38 minutes onto this and we're barely talking about the main title of the show. So,
well, let me make a comment. Let me interrupt. And I've been going back as I'm starting to focus more on the content. We're starting to get on our feet in terms of the clinic growth. And we get a lot of comments from people that are watching the YouTube live, and they say, wait a minute, it's 30 minutes, 40 minutes into it before you start actually dealing with the topic. Yes, of course, that's exactly what happens on this type of show. It's a live show, and we're covering several different components of content. If you want to get something quickly, go to the other 6 days of the week. We have short form content that's even in shorts, less than 60 seconds. We also have other content which specifies and goes into the title, the content listed in the title. So, for example, after we've recorded this, Jesus will go in, start looking at the timestamps on where we actually cover this specific one, and create a shorter form content covering this content.
And if you like the banter, you can come every Wednesday over here.
That's right.
And if you don't like the banter, invite somebody who you don't like, so they can. Yes. If you think this is not good information, it's not valuable, it's not entertaining, send somebody that you don't like to see it.
Hit the don't like the thumbs down if you don't like it. What's interesting is that promotes the channel as much as a thumbs up.
Yep. Okay, so let's go to the main topic finally. sodium and premature aging. So it's not news that some people age faster than others, and there are multiple risk factors. And to Dr. Bruce's skepticism, water restriction appears to be one of those. And there are previous studies that suggest that low hydration correlates with future development of heart failure, metabolic disease, and mortality. So this is what this group of researchers from the Lancet or that published on the Lancet from the U.S. presented on January this year. So they had a group already, as Dr. Brewer said. How do you call that study, Dr. Brewer? Did you mention that?
The atherosclerosis risk in communities study.
That's right. So it's interesting because this is a long research. You don't see this type of research that often. They follow this group of people for 25 years. So imagine waiting 25 years to present your results. Or sometimes there's one type of research that is called a post hoc analysis. Whenever you're going back to previous data, evaluating all of that, seeing the follow-ups, and then presenting two different associations. And this is something similar to what they did here. So they used the serum sodium as a marker for hydration, and they compared that to calculated biological age. And that biological age was assessed by their own standards using different things, different biomarkers, such as blood glucose, blood cholesterol, A1C, kidney function, respiratory function, blood pressure, cystatin C, creatinine, uric acid, among others, CRP. They included CRP as well. So using all of those biomarkers, they come up with a kind of a trend, or to say if somebody was biologically the age they were supposed to be. And they follow them for 25 years.
This is starting to sound like that old concept of real age or biological age as opposed to chronological age.
Exactly. And you know this group of people that they look like they're on their 20s and they're actually 40, 50s, yep. Right?
I'm not going to mention anybody that might be on the show today.
and I can tell you it's not me.
Yeah, you don't look in your 40s. Just a couple of comments about translation. You mentioned post hoc a minute ago. That, for those that missed it or are not familiar with it, that's POST, 2 words, hoc, HOC, and that's compared to ad hoc. Post hoc is taking in something where data was collected a long time ago and analyzing that data, maybe doing some follow-up. Ad hoc is maybe the comparison point where you're just taking something real time and doing some current analysis.
So the results, they saw that those who had serum sodium about 142 millimoles per liter on their middle ages, and when I say middle age, I didn't specify, 45 to 66 years old. So it's on the 45s and 50s. There was an association with a 39% risk of developing chronic diseases. If it was up to 144, 21% elevated risk for premature mortality. And if it was above 142, also there was a 50% higher odds to be older than their chronological age. Now, to the credit of the authors, they took out people who already had higher levels of sodium because of something else. You know, there are some endocrine diseases that can cause your sodium to go higher than usual, or they were supplementing, or there was something different that was just causing their sodium to go high for other reasons other than hydration. So those were not considered under this group. They wanted to specifically assess high levels of sodium because of not adequate hydration, day-to-day hydration. And this one, this is the Dr. Brewer's comments. I'm gonna yield to Dr. Brewer to explain a little bit about his perspective on this one.
So, as I said earlier on, I approach this whole topic with skepticism. If I've heard it once, I've heard it maybe 1,000 times. Drink water. And when you actually looked at the data, at least when I looked at data, I've not really seen a whole lot of real evidence saying that water hydration was a major long-term determinant of health. As I mentioned before, I'd actually seen the other side where people got dehydrated and then rehydrated without electrolytes, causing hyponatremia, which can be very dangerous on an acute basis, causing seizures and death. So to me, I thought it sounded like something that sounds good, maybe urban myth, but something that really didn't have a whole lot of evidence supporting it. When I saw this headline, I thought, oh, really? This is going to be bad. Then I looked, and no, it's in one of the top medical journals in the world. Again, albeit with, the Lancet and some of the deserved rep it gets for maybe firing too quickly. But then you start looking deeper, and the study itself came from the ERIC study group, or analysis of ERIC database, as Jesus talked about. This is sort of, ERIC has become sort of like, what's the town near about an hour from Boston?
Framingham?
Yeah, it's become sort of like Framingham, and that a lot of it's a database. There's a lot of really good data that's been collected. It's on multiple communities, not just one. And as we mentioned before, the two major races that you see in the United States, the African American and Caucasian races, looking at something very biologically important, atherosclerosis. And the reason that they did this, they had an opportunity to look at a marker for dehydration early on, middle age, age 45 to 66, meaning I'm in my last year of middle age. They looked at that and they said, let's look again 20 years later and see the probability of having developed one of the chronic diseases, one of the diseases that kills people. That was actually a pretty good study design, surprisingly good compared to other studies that you may have seen in this area. And the evidence came up, yep, they did see significant increase in chronic disease 20 years later for people that had this indicator of dehydration the 20 years earlier. So one of the things I looked at, as I discussed, I first saw it, and the first components of ERIC, when they first developed the database, it was a cross-sectional study, and cross-sectional studies have a host of problems. But again, they started with the cross-sectional data and then they followed it. So very strong components of getting prospective studies there. So
if you see that those tables, there are multiple covariates, which means other factors. And whenever you see a lot of those, it gives power to the paper or to the analysis because they're considering other factors. They're not just assuming that one factor is the cause of everything. They are using statistical models to identify the impact of other factors. So if you see smoking, you see hypertension, you see other stuff, and they address that and they say, of course, if somebody has been smoking and somebody has a poor diet, they're very likely to have a bigger impact. But if you take out of the equation, there is still risk regarding this specific thing we're studying, in this case, dehydration and high serum sodium.
So it's a good point, and let me maybe help translate some of that. The covariates. So one of the questions that people might come up with would be, well, wait a minute, maybe smoking was causing this hypernatremia, this relatively high sodium level in the Middle Ages. And so they go back and they look at sodium and say, yep, whether you were smoking or not, we still saw this risk factor associated with high sodium. And then you might say, well, it might be hypertension because people are taking like diuretics or other medications that impact that. And maybe this is all explained by hypertension. They said, okay, yep, we'll go back and look at that. And again, they saw the same thing. It didn't matter whether you had high blood pressure or hypertension or not. In both groups, you were still seeing this increased risk of chronic disease if you had hypernatremia or that marker for dehydration in middle age. The other thing that you didn't bring up that's in this table is a little bit of a dose response curve. Also, a very, very strong epidemiological marker. Dose response just means, okay, the more you have of the study, the item being studied, the more you have of the outcome. And if you look at it, people that had 135 to 138, yep, they had 1.27 risk. 140 to 142, 1.27 risk. But then once you go up higher to 143 to 146, a significant jump in the outcome. So there's a little bit of what we call a dose response curve, also a very powerful indicator of significance in a study.
And just to consider, sometimes the laboratory values for normal sodium go up to 145.
Mm-hmm.
So this can be easily be left out and not considered whenever we're seeing lab work, because the laboratory might not highlight it as high because it's within ranges. So
you may be on the higher end of normal. You say I'm normal, and then you ignore it and move on.
Exactly. So they are basically saying you should have your sodium between 138 and 142. It's a really small margin.
Now, one of the things you brought up when we discussed this was that we haven't looked at this in our patients.
I mean, we didn't have this evidence until just yet.
And how strong is this evidence? Are we going to start looking at this in our patients?
If you ask me, probably not systematically, but I'm for sure going to look closer to the sodium levels from now on.
And
go ahead, Jeannie.
No, I was just going to say, and we do look for any abnormals. If we see abnormal labs, I mean, we'll look more specifically because some of the ranges on some of the lab isn't going to be, 142 as the top of the line. But I do think it's important to look at. But if we do see abnormal labs, we do try to pay attention to those.
It's good points. I would say, look, we do have what's called a research signal. There's there's an association that has been discovered here or documented between a marker of dehydration in middle age and increased risk of chronic disease, life-threatening chronic disease. So yes, we do need to pay attention to that. However, the evidence here is nothing compared to the evidence associated with having a blood sugar of 210 at a 1 hour OGTT, and the risk associated with death and disability. So we're still going to focus on by far the biggest risks. This is something that we all need to start paying attention to, though.
So I just had one last question, Dr. Burr. Who were you imitating? Who were you imitating on telling you that you should drink water?
Oh my gosh! I'm not gonna say my mama.
No. I'm giving you a chance to prevent any catastrophic recall at home. So
yeah, I'm not sure that I'm going to repeat that. Answer that question. I'm going to plead the fifth. I'm afraid I might incriminate myself if I answer
that. That's good. So, any more comments before we go to the Q&A?
Not from me.
Not for me.
So let's move on to the YouTube members' questions. So when I say YouTube members questions, don't take it badly. If you're not a YouTube member and you send your question, of course we might be able to read it. I'm just saying that we're gonna go to YouTube members first. So if you see here, Glenn, and I assume his Chromebook just become a YouTube member. We appreciate that. So you see he has a small icon next to the name. So if you have that, you have joined our YouTube channel. So I don't know why YouTube did this. Probably it's because of money, but you can be a subscriber. So that means that you will get the videos on your feed more usual than other moments. You hit the bell. That means that you're gonna get a notification whenever we upload a video. But if you join to the channel, you have other perks that you don't get just by being subscribed, as in this case, getting your questions read first. And we have seen that sometimes what happens is that this becomes a 1 or 2 people show when we have somebody who just became a member and happens to be on the show live and they're sending multiple questions. So we are going to address those. Just like Robert Pinsky right here, who says that he read that SGLT2s, it's like backwards, SGLT2s and keto are a bad combination because they are a potassium sparing diuretic and they can have high potassium levels, also might deplete minerals. So how do you do keto and SGLT2s and keep electrolytes balanced? So any thoughts on that one, Dr. Brewer?
Other than this, not a lot, but one comment. Folks that are on keto do have challenges in terms of both positive electrolytes, sodium and potassium. And so the typical advice, and I agree with it, is not to worry quite so much about restricting sodium. People do tend to restrict sodium. You see that, for example, a lot in one of the most popular or highest rated diets, when you go back to that American Heart Association content that we covered a week or two ago, the DASH diet. There's significant sodium restriction in that diet. And I think it's questionable to restrict sodium or potassium when you're on a more of a keto related diet.
And I don't think you should be concerned on SGLT2s more than you should be on other diuretics. Other diuretics have more impact on potassium than this one.
I think that's a very good point. And in fact, when you look at most populations that are dealing with prediabetes, most of them have high blood pressure, and most of them quite often, especially up until recently, there was a lot more people, and there still is a lot more people on diuretics than there are on SGLT2s.
If I can give you an experience that I have a couple of months ago, I had a patient who was like, I believe she was 81, 82 years old, who was on multiple medications for hypertension and heart failure. She was developing some edema on her legs, and her internist increased the diuretics just, to my opinion, just too much. And granted, she didn't had any more edema, but she ended up developing hyponatremia, as you mentioned, Dr. Brewer. So I had to hospitalize. How do you say that?
Hospitalized?
I had to put her in the hospital because of that. Getting her rehydrated, adjusting medication, and just the switch on medication caused her to be in the hospital for 2 days. So that kind of things happen. And hyponatremia can be deadly. As Dr. Brewer mentioned, it can swallow your brain, and that's it.
So I think there's a good thing to remember too. Anytime you're doing different diets or changing things like that, and electrolytes, need to be monitored. If you're not taking in things, you're not supplementing, and you're depleting your body of it, they do need to be monitored. That is why we do quarterly tests that do monitor electrolytes.
Yeah.
And actually, that's a really good point. And let me go back and make some very general comments about electrolytes. You don't tend to hear about them too often because in most situations, the foods you eat provide the electrolytes you need. If you're on diuretics, which used to be the frontline medication for high blood pressure, one of the most common chronic diseases we have. Diuretics actually work by making your kidney release electrolytes. If you're working in 95-degree weather and you're out boating or having fun in 95-degree weather for hour after hour, you're sweating, and your sweat loses sodium and potassium. And there are medicines like Robert mentioned a minute ago that aren't really set up as diuretics, but have some diuretic function. The SGLT2, actually, that stands for sodium potassium inhibitors, transport inhibitors. The PCSK9s, I think that's what Robert was talking about. Was he not talking about the PCSK9?
SGLT2s.
Oh, the SGLT2s. They actually work by decreasing the function of a component of the kidney where it pulls glucose. If your glucose goes over 100, you begin to spill glucose. There's a function within the kidney tubules to go back, find that glucose, and pull it back in, and it trades that for sodium. So you do lose sodium with that function. So anyhow, there are different medications as well as different activities, like running a marathon in 80-degree weather. All of these things can deplete us of electrolytes. At that point in time, then it's not so much relying on the diet, but as Jeannie said, be careful, go ahead and test it. It's simple and easy enough to do.
Yep. And Robert is asking for a non-blood test way to test it. So there are different, you can have some symptoms, some signs, especially if you're getting dehydrated. Whenever you're dehydrating, you might have some electrolyte imbalance as well. But it's risky to go to that route because how do you detect that you have high potassium until you have heart dysrhythmias?
Well, in low sodium, you can have an arrhythmia as well. So that's when it's getting pretty far when you start having big symptoms like that.
Yeah, this woman that I had to put on the hospital, she was starting to develop some delirium, and so
that's not good.
Exactly,
that can't be good.
Yeah, so I don't think you want to wait until that. It's better to get a pinch and get that measured.
I still have friends that are in the endurance running community, and one of the more remarkable runs is called Badwater. And I'm not sure, but I think it's about 100 miles in sometimes 100-degree Fahrenheit plus temperature. Talk about danger. And I was reading an excerpt, an article by a fellow who is 66-year-old running this. And he was talking about all the cramps he was getting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and he knew he was getting dehydrated. He knew he was losing electrolytes. And it's like, you're getting cramps. You're running 100 miles in 100+ degree weather. That's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
You can seize and die. So think about it. And maybe put a little bit more effort into replacing those electrolytes as you lose them.
I think people have to keep common sense.
Go ahead, Dini.
No, I'm sorry, Jesus. I didn't mean to steal your thunder.
But you did. No, no. Go ahead. Go ahead. I think what you're going to say is more substantial than what I was going to say.
Well, I think that the big thing is you have to use common sense. People sometimes forget common sense, and if your body is giving you cues, then you best listen to the cues and deal with it. Denying it isn't going to make it go away. And lots and lots of people end up on IV fluid because they have their electrolytes are out of balance a lot of the time. And you don't have to just be an old person; you can be a young person. Working out too hard and at basketball practice, you get all different kind of things can happen. So you have to use common sense, and electrolytes are a big thing when you're sweating a lot. That's concerning. Now, if you are sweating a lot and then you stop sweating, that's even more concerning. So look for the signs and red flags and Google them if you must, but you may need to get your labs checked.
Ginny, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to disagree with you
Okay.
because not everybody has the same common sense.
No, they don't. That is true.
Common sense can be uncommon.
Yeah,
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I think the three of us might have the same perspective, but I think there's a lot of people that might not have the same, and for them, it should be normal to go on a run at 105 Fahrenheit degrees. That's around 40 Celsius degrees for us who use the international system. And I still see a lot of people that think that if they're not sweating, they're not burning calories and they're not losing fat. And it's like you're stuck in the old school thinking of what exercise should look like. I've seen
Well, and
people
and
putting
you're right about that, Jesus.
plastic bags on their belly because they
Mm.
think that's gonna burn fat.
Remember years ago when and it's probably been recent, but the last time I saw it was a few years ago when they were trying to get kids to make weight for football or wrestling, and they were doing these things, and then the kids were dying because it was ridiculous. And I mean, and if the people are missing that piece of common sense, then there's not a lot you can do. And you're right, but common sense and what's safe and what's not, and what's a red flag. I mean, maybe if you're doing that, you need to look up what red flags are. If you don't have inert common sense, you need to add it from the side, then get your risk factors, and if those happen, then intervene, I guess.
What I think is most of our viewers, almost all of our viewers, are in that category on
Yes.
having common sense. So that's a good thing, also.
Yes, that's good.
Good, very good discussion. So let's go to the next one. Jay Petard, what's the cost of testing for 9P21? Just seem to question the money versus benefit value for that paying for that test compared to 4Q25 and ApoE. So this comes from a comment from D. Dutton, who is a usual viewer, and I'm gonna grant him this question. Dr. Brewer answered this about different genes: 9P21, 4Q25, ApoE, KIF6, HP. Dr. Burr did a comment about Dr. Burr had a postgraduate training on those. It seems like I'm reading what you can do, what you can say, Dr. Burr. What would you do?
So let's go back to D. Dutton's question. So he looked at the Bale-Deneen book, page 255, recommended testings for cardiogenetics. And I used to work with Brad and Amy. Did a lot of that type of cardiovascular risk assessment. That was back in a time when we were doing 4 hours with a patient. Cardiogenetics was about half an hour to an hour, depending on how many questions the patients had. And I actually went on to get a little bit more graduate training in genetics. At the end of the day, there were costs associated with looking at genetics. And the costs were not all just getting the genetic testing. There was a lab that I worked with. I actually worked with the lab that did most of the cardiogenetics. It was a lab called My Genetics. And again, there was cost there. There was the headache of getting those labs drawn and sent to the lab. But then, as I said, that's adding another half hour to an hour to an already very expensive. These were like $5,000 evaluations several years ago. So it's not just cost associated with getting the lab itself. It's not just the hassle factor. It's also the cost of going down that bunny hole. All of that's important when you consider the reality that genetics may load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. So again, yes, you can go ahead and get cardiogenetics. How helpful is it to spend a lot of time focusing on that? And so then, at the risk of going way too far down this bunny hole, I'll also look at each of the genes for just a second. 9p21, that is the heart attack gene. When you read Brad and Amy's book, they say beat the heart attack gene. They're talking about 9p21. 9 is the chromosome number. It's the 9th chromosome, the p21 area. Over half of people have that gene. It does create increased risk of heart attack and stroke. They used to think it was a cancer gene. Then they decided that it was more of a diabetes related gene. That's the biggest issue. It's more of a diabetes related gene. Over half of us have it. So at that point in time, how much is it worth going into your time, your focus, your money to look at that and find something that you've got greater than a 1 in 2 chance of having? KIF6 was far more important back when you were looking at high costs associated with Crestor. When Crestor had not lost its patent, it was very expensive. When you were looking at alternatives with pravastatin, simvastatin, those were much more important. Now, not so much importance because you just put everybody on everybody that needs a statin that already has plaque, just suggest either Crestor, rosuvastatin, or generic rosuvastatin or pitavastatin. Don't even worry about simvastatin and pravastatin. 4q25, that's the atrial fib gene. How much do you need to know about that beforehand? Are you going to actually, if you're an endurance athlete, are you going to actually decrease the endurance athletics only if you have 4q25 and not if you don't? So again, at the end of the day, you start looking at all of this, and most of those I really didn't feel were worth the added expense and the added half an hour to 1 hour on a 5-hour evaluation, 4 or 5 hours. ApoE is helpful, and unfortunately, it's more difficult to get than it used to be. But ApoE is the one that starts looking at if you've got ApoE4, you've got increased risk for cardiovascular inflammation. So again, I went way, way down a bunny hole. I'm going to pop back up and hand it back to you.
I appreciate it. I appreciate that you went over all this gene testing, because sometimes we have a lot of questions about that. We don't order them like on a systematic way, just only people who might need it or requested that. And I appreciate that you're giving back control. So that's good as well. Now let me
And insurance probably won't cover any gene testing. I'll just throw that out there. I would very much bet that no insurance will cover any genetic testing.
So we're gonna call Jesus the answer Nazi and Jeannie the insurance Nazi.
Yeah, I will happily take that title.
So Ricky the Gun, he's a member, of course. He had a CIMT today. Technician had no idea if the test could distinguish between soft and hard plaque.
I would ask. That raises the immediate question: where did you get that CIMT? Because it doesn't sound like that tech was that well trained.
It wasn't cardio risk.
No, it wasn't cardio risk. It's not. It doesn't. Cardio risk is not near him. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see the results. But if the technician does not differentiate between soft and hard plaque, I don't think the results are going to be as good as we would like. I mean, the one of the downsides of the CIMT and ultrasound in general it depends of the person who is making the test and the interpretation they provide and the images they take. So if the technician doesn't know how soft plaque looks like, we're in trouble.
Yeah. That's not a good sign.
Glenn, I keep hearing about Glynac and that it raises glutathione. Glutathione? So before I started taking Glynac, I tested my glutathione blood level. They were out of range, but not low. They were very high. So what I can tell you about glutathione is what I have seen on the research is that it's considered a fairly potent antioxidant. It has benefits on multiple metabolism cascade chains and processes. When glutathione is low, it's been associated with heart disease, diabetes, and other chronic conditions. That's why sometimes there are recommendations on supplementing for that. How strong is the evidence? I mean, I think we can cover glutathione in the future. I'm going to write it down here. I haven't seen
in the past. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I haven't seen anything that says that high levels of glutathione are dangerous or anything. They're actually protective. How high? Again, I don't think there's enough evidence on how high glutathione can be. So I don't know if you want to mention a little bit about this.
So I've never heard of Glynac. Never heard of it. It's a patented combination of the amino acids glycine and N-acetylcysteine. So I don't know if that's a hidden plug for Glynac, a patented product, or if he's actually hearing about it. I don't know why he would be hearing about it unless their advertising is pretty good.
Let us know, Glenn. Are you a Glynac employee and you're trying to put your brand on the show? I mean, if that's the case, we can talk about sponsorships. I don't think we have any, right, Dr. Brewer? I mean, for Dr. Brewer to recommend a brand, it has to have plenty of evidence.
Yeah. Very good point.
J. Pitard, what does 20 MAQ mean when referring to prescribed potassium milliequivalents? That's the way some electrolytes are being measured. They don't come on milligrams. They don't come on deciliters. They come on milliequivalents. Dr. Brewer answering to somebody who's not a YouTube member. Thanks, Jane. Nattokinase is very popular. It makes sense, but the evidence is pretty weak. Perhaps it's due to degradation of the protein components in the gastrointestinal tract. So, Dr. Brewer, you're not a member of your own channel. So, any comments of nattokinase?
None other than what I just said. A lot of people just love nattokinase. Nattokinase is very popular, but the evidence is not that powerful.
Yeah, and just so you know, for all of those who like the supplement style, I've seen plenty of patients' cabinets of supplements, and they show all of them. And sometimes patients' rationale before taking a supplement is, I saw it with Dr. Brewer, I saw it here, I saw it there, I read an article about it, and sometimes it's like somebody told me it's going to help me. I don't know how or why, but I'm just taking it because of that. So we know supplements are a big deal. We are wanting to cover more and more of these supplements. Dr. Brewer has a couple of videos on natto and others. We might put some other short slides on some of these supplements just so you know, if that's something that you're interested in. J. Pitard, Jesus, when you give a prescription to a patient in Mexico, how do they get refills? Janet often has patients from Mexico. I don't know. Who's Janet? Well,
I think that's his wife.
Okay, yeah. So I'm gonna take less than a minute. I hope so, Dr. Brewer, because this is kind of how medicine works in Mexico. As I mentioned, I don't see patients from the U.S. I'm starting to see patients who come from the channel and they live in Mexico. So if you live in Mexico, I can see you. My license is for all 32 states of Mexico. And prescriptions are pretty different than in the US. There's a lot of stuff that you can get on the pharmacy just by going in there and asking for it. You don't need a prescription for metformin. You don't need a prescription for any SGLT2, any hypertension medicine. You don't need a prescription for any of that. You only need prescription for antibiotics and for controlled substances, and even the high level controlled substances, because you can even get some antidepressants without a prescription. I don't know why. That's the way that it's in Mexico. So in order to get a refill, you just need to go to the pharmacy and ask for it, unless it's an antibiotic. Then you will need a prescription. So that's how the way it works. So I'm not saying you should go ahead and buy anything you want on the Mexico pharmacy. Of course, go with your physician. If you wanna get a consultation from me, you can search my name on Google. I don't know if Dr. Brewer will allow me to plug my brand on PrepMed at some moment. We haven't talked about that just yet. So I think I'm already crossing the line over here. But
and that's a not so hidden plug, isn't it?
no, yeah, I mean, I'm the one working on the sponsorship, so I just went ahead and put it right there. So no, if you look for my name on Google, I saw comments from somebody like weeks ago that said, "Who's that Dr. Jesus? That guy seems shady." Just just Google me. I'm on Google. You can find me. The thing is, my first last name is Nogues, Noguec, as in zebra. So it's hard. So it's just Jesus Vega. But you'll find me, and if you're in Mexico, I'll be happy to take you as a patient. I'm sorry, Dr. Brewer. Somebody asked, and he's a member. I can't jump questions from members. You know that.
That's right.
Ricky the Gun, good morning. Other than a plaque rupture resulting in a downstream clot, how does a stent clog? Is that a word?
Clog, yeah. How does it get stopped up or clogged?
Can diet and lifestyle clear it? I know you have a really, really good answer for this one, Dr. Brewer.
No, I don't. In the beginning, when I first saw it, I didn't understand what he was asking. I was seeing clog as a noun, not a verb. Now I'm beginning to see what he's saying. What causes a stent to clog up?
I think if you're having a clot inside the vessel, that means you're having a heart attack. I think we can agree on that, right?
Right.
There was some soft plaque, got ruptured. That hot plaque liquid went into the bloodstream. The body detected that and created a clot with multiple coagulation particles, proteins, and platelets. So the way this works is they don't go ahead and put a stent directly on that. They put a balloon first. So they go with a guide, kind of clean that up, put a balloon in it, insufflate it, open the vessel, and then they take out the balloon, and with the vessel open, now they go ahead and put the stent on it. So it's not so much the stent taking out the clot, but the balloon and all the stuff that goes in there. However, of course, that's life-saving. If you're having a heart attack at the moment, that's life-saving. Right. But if you're thinking about getting a stent to prevent that soft plaque to create a clot, that's a different.
Not going to happen.
That's a different business. That's not going to happen. That soft plaque is going to remain soft. It's still having the risk of creating a clot, and that can happen over time. It might take months, it might take years, but that can happen. And if you are thinking that a stent is going to prevent you to have a heart attack at any moment, that's just not going to happen.
So that was demonstrated in the Courage trial and the Orbita trial, ORBITA.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add to my... do you want to translate my pathophysiologic explanation of a heart attack and stent?
I don't think I need to, but I do have a couple of other comments specific to your to the question, though, Ricky the Gun. A stent will clog the same way that the rest of the artery will clog, and it's most often exactly what Jesus is talking about. You get an inflammatory state. Your immune system starts attacking that plaque. It releases enzymes. The enzymes do what they're supposed to. They start to digest that plaque. That plaque becomes soft, and when that soft plaque leaks back through the lining of the artery and touches liquid blood, it causes a clot. That clot if it hits a stent, can clog the stent just like it can clog any other part of the artery.
I was just wondering, Dr. Brewer, when you were thinking clog as a noun, were you thinking of the shoe?
You know what? Maybe that was wrong. Maybe that wasn't, maybe my logic was all confused. I didn't understand the question. I got lost when it said, how does a stent clog?
Well, I was thinking of the shoe, so I understand.
By the way,
Good.
we have a patient in about half an hour, Jesus. So I think we've got maybe 4 more minutes, and I'm going to have to turn into a pumpkin
Sounds good. So
and generate some vitamin A.
got it. So JP, what carrier provides your Medicare Advantage plan? And NC asking to Bob, that's Humana. So for those who have Humana, probably they may pay for a TMT, probably not.
Right,
I don't
yeah.
want to get in trouble. Somebody said that I said on a YouTube live that Medicare would pay for anything. I don't think I ever said that. So be careful about that. Peggy Douglas about Glynac.
Glycine and N-acetylcysteine.
Yeah. Okay, so that's on the people who are a subscription, and we have a interesting question from Lucian P, and I'm happy that we were able to address that. We were talking about this before the show. So Lucian says that she drinks Gatorade almost exclusively for these reasons. I was not familiar with Gatorade. I don't think that we have that in Mexico, but it seems that it's different to Gatorade because it has like 75% less sugar. So this is the thing that I wanted to comment on that, and of course you can interrupt me at any moment.
Which we will do.
Yeah, as you do. So Gatorade is you see the brand, if you see the bottle, it says for athletes. So that's, and Dr. Brewer said, I used to take Gatorade. This is not I'm not throwing punches at you, Dr. Brewer. I drink Gatorade at some moment of my life as well. But if you're not an athlete, my personal opinion, not an expert opinion, is probably should not be drinking Gatorade. You know, whenever you're having probably if you are not an athlete, but you're having high intensity exercise that can drop your blood glucose at the moment and that can get you dehydrated, yes, probably Gatorade is a good option because all that glucose, extra glucose that you're taking, it's all that sugar is going to bypass insulin receptors and go directly to the muscle, and it's going to be used immediately. So you don't have the risk of spikes after that. Of course, everybody's different. There are some athletes that can even have some small pieces of chocolate on their pockets for immediately after a high intensity exercise. So that's a good way to get some sugar and get some energy back. If you're not on that category and then you're having a mild walk outside and then you want to drink Gatorade to supplement electrolytes, that's probably a bad idea. You can compare that with your glucometer and see how that works. So if Gatorade is indeed less sugary and more electrolytes, I don't know, probably it's a good alternative. Lucian P, you can let us know if you work for Gatorade. So now that we have a YouTube video where everybody is putting their brand on it. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about this one, Dr. Burr.
Well, I have a thought on it. Hey, Dr. Burr, I'll just jump in real quick.
Please
so
do.
if you're working outside,
you have to learn to do that.
Absolutely. Jump in. So if you're working outside in the heat, like in Florida right now, there's a good chance, now not in the hurricane path, but I'm praying for all those people. Thankfully, it's missed us here in Panama City Beach, thankfully, but it's really hurting the people in Apalachicola and Tampa, and I saw Tarpon Springs this morning and stuff. So we're praying for all you guys for sure. But it's been so hot lately that, people are supplementing with Gatorade and the water. But I know my son and son-in-law have a framing company, and they're out in this heat all the time, and they buy tons of water and they buy Gatorade to supplement because they're all their guys are drinking so much, the heat has been terrible. It's been like 108 heat index. They've been going at 6 a.m. and getting done by 2 because it's just so hot. So just for that.
Point. excellent point. And I'm going to go back to the three basics that we talked about. So, Jesus, when I was talking about using Gatorade, I'm glad you mentioned that, because there were some conditions that I didn't clarify. I was talking about when we run marathons, and when you run a marathon, what you'll find is they have stations. Hydration stations is what they call them, and they almost always, at least at the last marathon I ran was over 10 years ago, but up until that point, you really had on the choice of two things: Gatorade or water. And a lot of people avoided the Gatorade because of things that, like you just said, they heard it's always healthier to drink water. And those were the folks, especially if it's like 80 degrees and you're running a marathon, those were the folks that they drank water. And then the next station, they drank water. And the next station, they drank water. And then when they got through, they drank water because they heard that Gatorade was bad. Those were the folks that tended to be at risk for hyponatremia.
Mm-hmm.
So what I tended to do was one station water, one station Gatorade. I didn't buy Gatorade. I don't drink it unless I'm doing one of the things that risk hyponatremia. And Jeannie mentioned another thing: working in the heat, athletic activities, especially in the heat, and somebody who is taking things that decrease your sodium. So
Gatorade don't sponsor us.
they're not going to sponsor us. But then you get folks that are doing a combination of the three. People that are on a diuretic and working in 95-degree heat hour after hour, or on a diuretic and running a marathon in 80-degree heat. So again, these are people that Gatorade makes a little bit more sense. Or some of the, Gatorade's not the only one. It's the most well-known. Another comment about Gatorade. I saw somebody making a comment that it's only Gatorade that works. Gator Light or Gatorade Zero doesn't work. That's not entirely true. It's an oversimplification to say that these electrolytes only get put back into your cells if you have glucose or fructose helping transport them.
Very good. And, diet, like we talked about too, diet. If your diet is a carnivore diet and you don't get a lot of other vitamins and minerals and such, it's very important for you to get your electrolytes checked. And I'm not against any specific diet, just there's different, risk factors with all of them. So.
Sounds good.
Very good. Anything else for today?
No, just appreciation to all the viewers that stayed with us. I hope you enjoyed the show. We're gonna cover really interesting topics on next week's. So keep following the channel. Click the like button, share, subscribe, join. All the interactions matter, and we'll be happy to answer your questions next Wednesday if you are YouTube members, of course. No, send us your questions. We'll do our best.
Thank you much.